In the future, we have a saying. Sometimes the best way to move forward is to make a U-turn. To be fair, the saying won't actually catch on until like around the turn of the 22nd century. But I don't think I'm breaking any quantum time travel rules by letting you all know that it was inspired by you. See, you all may still be too young as a society to understand this, but the people of my time are actually able to carbon date our survival back to the exact date that you all stopped dating carbon. Yeah, the date that you updated your relationship status with the planet from it's complicated to our better half. A date our history books refer to as the Great U-Turn of 2022, a pivotal turning point in the climate change fight when a mighty group of visionaries, backs turned to the walls, made a vow to the world to make a U-turn, a collective you plus me turn, a collective we turn that turned your climate of no return into new possibilities like a bold key turn. Unblocked hope, unlocked truth, and as it turns out, was initiated by your youth. Yeah, that's right. Your kids. Yes, yes. Don't clap too early because your kids are to blame for the outcome of this fight. What? They started it. They are the warriors at the heart of it who turned carbon-chained pacifists into climate change activists. So I suggest y'all get ready, because what's about to happen is every time you remind your daughter that money doesn't grow on trees, you know, she is going to remind you that trees can grow from money, you know. Right? Let's go. Get ready. Every time you tell your nephew to eat his broccoli and his pears, he will tell you, well, go plant some broccoli and grow a pear. Or a plum, you know, or a persimmon or a peach. Every time you tell them to clean their room, they will tell you to clean a beach. Oh, it's going to get bad. They will watch you pack their daily lunch into a plastic bag until one day they turn to you sincerely and ask, wait. If we put food into plastic baggies to protect it from the environment, we put the environment in to protect it from the plastic baggies. How do we save the planet from the food? How do we shield it from the CO2? How do we protect nature from human nature's abuse until human nature catches up with nature's truths? It's the youth. Inspire you to keep these commitments that you've made that will lead to what we call your coming of sage, the upcoming days when you turned carbon removal into a race, a marathon run at a sprinter's pace, but not a race to beat the clock, a race to turn back the clock. Every footprint in reverse. This is not a race that is a race that is run backwards, right? Not to come in first, but to come in last, to lose your steam, to run out of gas. It's a race to resilience, to rebound, not resign, where the point is for the clock to hit zero at the finish line. So you turned the race to outer space on its head and decided to give Earth another shot with a race to zero that turned moonshot thinking into earth-shot thinking. This is crazy. I hear that what y'all did. Thank you, you know, to you, right? Listen, I hear that what you actually did was that you actually filled a space shuttle. Y'all are crazy. You filled a space shuttle with your best scientists and innovators, launched it into the sky, and then just as it reached outer space, made a U-turn and landed back on this planet where you discovered new forms of life beneath oceans and in rainforests, discovered an indigenous people, forging an advanced climate economy, made the ultimate space discovery right here at home, confirming once and for all that we are not alone. We sleep beneath the same stars each night, inhaling each other's laughs and exhaling each other's gasps. We are living, breathing forces of nature, trying to be forces for nature, for the infinite miracles teeming in the soil beneath our feet, for the tears full of clean ocean that waterfall from our cheeks, for a planet that identifies with every tree, every flower, every brush, proving our ecosystem's pronoun is we. It is our, it is us. We have the power to turn silos into symphonies, to turn can't into must. And I know it's exhausting. I know it's not that easy. But it's also not that tough. Maybe one day we just decide we must value different stuff. Maybe one day we insist on a greater high than just the gold rush. Maybe one day you look up and you just had enough. Maybe one day you just refuse to go to the back of the bus. Maybe you're not Martin. You're just Rosa. You're just a regular gal. Maybe you don't save the planet as president, but it's just some dude named Al. You're just tired and like your chair. You're just breathing and like your air. You're just swapping likes for likes with like-minded folks who care. You're just finally turning business as usual into business as mutual, the currency of exchange, because you can no longer afford to make dollars that don't make change. This, my friends, is the great moment of your great U-turn, when it begins, the pivotal turning point, when your losses turn to wins, when they ask you, who win? And you told them, you win. When you took a world that spins out of control and you remixed it on your turntables until you turned the tables, you turned the tides, you turned around minds, you turned like the blades on wind turbines, you turned your winter time into our summer shine. So do not doubt the power of this moment in time. You can turn your stormy weather into a storm that we can weather. You can make the choice to make the turn for the better, because this is your race. It's your world. It's your time to renew your vows. Your earth has kept her promise to sustain you. It's your turn now. Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you.
Please welcome UN Secretary General's Special Envoy for Climate Ambition and Solutions and founder of Bloomberg Philanthropies and Bloomberg LP, Michael R. Bloomberg.
Thank you. Well, I will say Sekou needs to learn how to show some enthusiasm. Back to follow, but hello, everyone, and thank you all for coming. And let me start by thanking our high-level climate action champions, Nigel Topping and Dr. Mohammed Mohieldin, as well as the Executive Secretary of the United Nations for Climate Change, Simon Steele, who you're going to hear from a little later, and UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. They have been terrific partners for our team at Bloomberg Philanthropies for a very long time, and let's give them a big round of applause. We are all here today because we understand the urgency of the climate crisis. And every day brings news of deadly droughts, wildfires, floods, heat waves, and other extreme weather conditions that are causing so much damage to our health and our economies. How can anyone see the devastating floods in Pakistan and the Caribbean, and the fires in the western United States, and droughts, and not react? It's really quite amazing. We see it, we know it's right. It's not a question of whether these events are taking place. And yet we talk about 2050 and 2040 and 2030. I'm not sure 2023 isn't beyond our control. There is so much at stake for our own communities, our nations, our children, and for generations to come. Hopefully there will be generations to come, but maybe not at the rate we're going. This reality really is an all-hands-on-deck situation, and one of the best ways to accelerate progress is to empower the groups that can act quickly and boldly, including cities and regions and businesses. Over the course of history, we've seen just how the most powerful economic changes usually happen from the bottom up. And they happen through a combination of private sector innovation and public sector support. And that's why we're here. It's been true of revolutions in industry and transportation and communications, and it's proving true in the clean energy revolution as well. Progress is being driven from the bottom up, from entrepreneurs and companies, cities and regions, organizations, and everything in between. But the challenge is to bring even more of these groups into the mix, empower them to be even more ambitious and to work together and to hold their feet to the fire, measure what they're doing, and do something about it. And so in recent years, we brought together over 11,000 non-state actors from across 116 countries who are committed to cutting emissions by 50% over the next 8 years. God help us if we don't have 8 years to do it, and who knows whether we can get it done in that time. The group includes 8,000 businesses, 1,000 cities, 500 of the world's largest financial institutions, all of them talking, and committed to take major steps to dramatically cut their emissions. And through the Race to Resilience, the sibling campaign to Race to Zero, members have pledged to make 2.3 billion people more resilient by 2030 and increase the resilience of many areas most threatened by climate change. Will we tomorrow do it? I don't know. There's not a lot of evidence that we take it as serious. The future of the world really is in doubt and at risk. We face two challenges. First, we have to ensure we hold everyone accountable for fulfilling their pledges. We all go and pledge monies, and then it never shows up. I remember Haiti had a hurricane or an earthquake, I think it was. The world pledged billions of dollars, and only a few $100,000 ever showed up. Now, our foundation is working on several efforts to make what we promise a reality, including a publicly accessible data portal that is bringing together and standardizing corporate emissions data. The data will help the public and investors know whether a company's climate actions match their pledges. If we don't know, as I said, we can't manage it. So we have to be able to, if we're going to hold them responsible, you've got to be able to point to, you said this, and darn it, I'm going to make sure you do it. Second, we have to mobilize more funding to support climate actions around the world, especially in developing countries. And so today, we are announcing a new commitment that will help these efforts. Back in May at the Sustainable Energy for All conference in Kigali, we announced a large expansion of Bloomberg Philanthropies' efforts to accelerate the clean energy transition. It's a $222 million program focused on 10 countries in Africa, Latin America, and Asia. And today, I'm glad to say that we are expanding the program to 15 more developing countries. And as part of these grants, we will work with national governments and make sure subnational actors always have a seat at the table, because that's where they're going to get action. Whether it is a nation, whether nations in north or south, rich or poor, local and private sector leaders will have to play a central role in determining the amount of progress that we make. By empowering them, we really can win the race to net zero, but we have to have specific goals, and we have to make sure that we deliver rather than just talk about it. As the old expression goes, talk is cheap. And to help build momentum before COP27 in Egypt in November, Bloomberg Philanthropies is kicking off a 45-day series of climate actions aimed at turbocharging our progress, because we really don't have a day to waste. Now, I'm going to pass it to someone who has really taken on a critically important job, the new Executive Secretary of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. That is UNFCCC. Rolls off your tongue right away. But Simon Steele's name should roll off your tongue, because he is somebody that's going to make a difference. We're glad to have him here with us today. and I know our team at Bloomberg Philanthropies is looking forward to working with him. So please join me in welcoming Simon Steele to the stage. Nice round of applause for him. Simon.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Michael. It's a pleasure to be here for this critical Race to Zero and Resilience Forum. And thank you for your support. The level of work, energy, and expertise you and your team have brought to bear on climate issues over the years has been extraordinary. Ladies and gentlemen, Paris, Glasgow, and a host of other conferences proved that climate change has slowly moved to the center of the international agenda. But it's time to move it to the center of each national agenda. And at the heart of every agenda is in the private sector as well. We have an incredible amount of work to do, both inside and outside of the formal climate change process to achieve this. Inside the process, it means pivoting to implementation and making progress on the 4 core areas of mitigation, adaptation, finance, and support, and turning those words in all of those conferences into real concrete action. We need to see greater action outside of the process as well, building on initiatives such as the Race to Zero, the Race to Resilience, and GFANZ, and other coalitions. I'm pleased to note that in the past few years, thousands of non-state actors working under the Race to Zero and Resilience banners have committed to achieving ambitious net zero targets and strengthening resilience throughout the world, often in local and vulnerable communities. This is exactly the positive momentum we need now more than ever. The key part for all players, state and non-state actors alike, is that commitments made must be commitments delivered, and to be seen to be delivered. I'm therefore pleased to see discussions on transparency, accountability, and collaboration firmly on the agenda. I thank all of you for your hard work in driving climate action, resilience, and working to achieve accountability. We need all hands on deck, and we need to make progress rapidly. Because the changes we need to see must sweep through the private sector in a matter of years and not decades. Earlier I mentioned that climate change needs to be at the center of the agenda for every nation. It needs to be at the center of the agenda of every boardroom as well. With your support, we can ensure it is. We look forward to continuing our strong relationship, to energizing the Race to Zero and Race to Resilience, to delivering a stronger outcome at COP27, and continuing to build a future that is safer, healthier, and more prosperous for all people. I thank you.
We desperately need a new relationship. We can't expect unlimited economic development on a planet with finite natural resources. If governments and corporations make good their commitments on cutting emissions, this will certainly slow down climate change. Hope is about action, and Jane Goodall Institute's Roots and Shoots program, with members of all ages, now in 65 countries, requires young people to choose 3 projects to help people, to help animals, to help the environment, then roll up their sleeves and take action. They are our hope for the future. And so today, please join me in welcoming Joshua Amponsam. Joshua is a Ghanaian environmental activist and climate leader at the Office of the UN Secretary General's Envoy on Youth. He's the founder of Green Africa Youth Organization and a youth fellow at the Global Center on Adaptation, an organization focused on including more young people into the local and global development process. In his own words, advocacy and youth inclusion is now a necessity to ensure a viable economic transformation in Africa. So please join me in welcoming Joshua to the stage.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. In 2018, I had a vision. Out of frustration of seeing food waste and agricultural waste on the street causing public health risk to communities, I imagined that there could be a time where communities can work with their waste and regenerate and get it back into their soils. Now, in 2022, we have a 15,000-member community doing exactly that, taking food waste, agricultural waste, composting, giving it back to soil, and replenishing soils that are depleting in nutrients, making sure that they're reducing public health risk, but most fundamentally, also creating jobs. You see, the future that we have ahead of us is not something that will just land. It's something that we think, we imagine, we create, we invent, and we build together. This is why, at COP27, we need a good imagination of that. It is a COP that cannot fail to deliver the finance that is needed for communities that are living on the front lines. It is a COP that cannot fail in giving communities on the front lines the money they need to build resilience. Because tell you what, we are all looking for a safer future, a fundamental human right, which no one should be deprived of that. And your work and my work and all of us contribute to that. So here's the thing. We need to invest in adaptation, we need to invest in resilience, and we need to invest in climate justice. I am calling on everyone here to support the youth climate justice movement and deliver the finance that is needed for us to mobilize, for us to come together, to innovate, and together with you, create the future that is needed. Beyond COP27, and taking inspiration from the UN Climate Change Adaptation Program, an initiative called Resilience Frontiers, I want both of us here now to create a new future that is set on a new foundation. A foundation where both at micro and macro scale, we question ourselves how our actions, our demands, our imaginations are in oneness with nature. Where we do not say humans and nature, but we say nature, and there's oneness of life. Thank you.
Please welcome Minister of Foreign Affairs for Egypt and President-designate of COP27, His Excellency Sameh Shoukry, in conversation with anchor at Bloomberg Quicktake, Jennifer Zabasaja.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, Your Excellency, for being here. You have a busy few weeks ahead of you, to say the least.
I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
So let's talk about the issue at hand. I mean, I was mentioning just a few weeks out from COP27, where Egypt is going to be hosting this event. What makes Egypt the right host country for this, especially considering we look at the effect that Africa is going to be having on with climate change?
Well, that's exactly why this is a COP on African soil, and I think the African continent is the most affected and has been the most challenged by climate change, and thereby to highlight the priorities and the ambitions of Africa is quite appropriate.
Why Egypt, though?
Well, Egypt, I think, has a leadership position on the African continent and the Arab world, has demonstrated its commitment to globalization, to also the issue of fighting climate and climate action, and thereby it was regarded. Sharm el-Sheikh is a pretty cool place to be as well.
That's what I've heard. I haven't been there, but I mean, I've heard that. But I wonder, just leading up to the event, when you think about the goals leading into Sharm el-Sheikh and COP27, what is it that you're really focused on in order to see some action actually coming out of this?
Well, we've been focused on implementation. We've geared our message from the outset that this is a COP of implementation. Paris and Glasgow finalized the roadmap of ambition, but it is Sharm el-Sheikh that should be the implementation of all of those commitments, and that we move forward in implementing and maintaining the momentum for dealing with the challenges of climate change, whether in terms of mitigation or adaptation and keeping the 1.5 degree alive, and in closing the finance gap. Unfortunately, there's a lot to be said with living up to expectations. Up till now, the $100 billion commitment has not been fulfilled. The challenges to adaptation and the issue of loss and damage is still in question, whether it's going to be sufficiently addressed. Thereby, we hope that this COP will show the commitment and will create the trust between both developed and developing countries.
What will be a signal that that's actually happened coming out of the event? Is it implementing some of these promises?
Definitely, it's implementing, and in implementation, transparency and accountability as to what exactly has been dispersed, and recognizing the need for a just transition, recognizing that developing countries need, especially in the current atmosphere, with the difficulties related to finance, that there is support to provide concessional finance and for governments to step in to encourage the private sector, which is fundamental. There are trillions of dollars available in investment in renewable technologies, in new carbon-related capture and other areas. And for that money to be released, I think there has to be also government encouragement through guarantees, through subsidies, and we hope that Africa, which has least contributed to the crisis, should gain the ability to adapt to the climate challenges that it faces.
Are you optimistic based on some of the commitments that we have heard from the private sector, or you want to see more?
We are optimistic that the private sector has shown a desire to be present on a wide scale in Sharm el-Sheikh, and I hope that they do not only participate, but indicate their willingness to support many of the initiatives that will be rolling out. We'll be rolling out initiatives, national, regional, and global initiatives and projects that will be ready to be financed. So I hope that the private sector will rise to the occasion and show their corporate commitment and responsibility to deal with this issue.
And how do you plan to balance the really conflicting sides that some governments and some leaders are taking? I mean, there was a signed by a number of African leaders to not make this about disinvestment from fossil fuels. So how do you plan to sort of navigate the opposing sides on this?
With skill, I hope, but seriously, we are living in a bit difficult time, and expectations and limitations are apparent. I think we have to be practical, but also we have to always direct ourselves towards what is a just transition. African countries, again, have a daunting challenge in providing for their populations and bringing people out of poverty, and they're very willing to undertake the responsibilities to deal with climate change, but they want to do so in a responsible manner, but in a manner that does not infringe on their sustainable development goals. So to strike the balance, there will be efforts that have to be provided, and there will be flexibilities and accommodations. And we hope to provide the environment for that flexibility and for reaching a point of convergence that responds to the needs and the interests of all parties.
What would that look like, though? Because they've made it pretty clear that it's going to affect their economy if there is a disinvestment of fossil fuels.
Again, I think we are all aware of the dangers in maintaining a high degree of dependency on fossil fuels and the need to transit to renewable energy, but we have to also be practical about just transition and to see how we can best incentivize countries to relinquish their dependency on fossil fuels. This is a matter that is certainly willing for African countries to undertake, but they need the financing to be able to rely more on renewable energies and to find the investment that's related to that issue, but also the investment in adaptation. It's not only mitigation that is at concern, and for many small island states that are threatened of extinction, adaptation is a very important portion, and you see the gap between mitigation finance and adaptation finance is certainly very dismal. So we have to concentrate if we are serious on adaptation as well as mitigation.
And how do you communicate that it's not just certain countries, right, that need that adaptation investment, but it's across the continent, right?
Definitely across the continent and across the world. I think this is an issue that all developing countries are interested in, and I hope that our message here will resonate and will have an effect.
And just thinking, I mean, the significance of this being for the first time in Africa, that is significant for a number of reasons, as you've outlined. But I wonder, when you think about previous COPs and having this one be the first on the continent, what is it that you're really hoping is taken away from this? I mean, what is it that you want to see?
Well, I certainly want to see a greater foundation of trust. And I think that.
Do you think that wasn't existing before?
There have been, I think Paris and Glasgow did create a momentum for trust, but I fear that during this year and with the geopolitical pressures and with the general economic environment, and unfortunately signals that have not been as positive, there is a deficiency in trust, and we must regain that confidence. To do so, we have to show a commitment, but that commitment has to be translated into actual commitments and the implementation of those commitments in providing the finance, in closing the finance gap, in having the goal for adaptation being clearly defined, and the pre-2025 goal on mitigation and finance.
And what do you think is sort of the biggest threat to any of that happening? I mean, you talked about the geopolitical issue.
The biggest threat is that parties during the negotiations revert to narrow national interests and disregard the global nature of this threat and think that they can proceed alone. No one can proceed alone if there isn't the commonality and recognition of the commonality and recognition of the science. I think the science is clear, the dangers are clear, and if we don't rise to the occasion as an international community, devoid of the current geopolitical crisis and tensions, we will reach a point of no return, and I think this will be devastating, and this generation will have to be accountable to future generations in having squandered the opportunity that we now have.
So you believe this COP27 is the one to begin implementing, not just talking about some of these promises?
Absolutely vital, and we hope that this COP will achieve success and will set the stage for increased momentum for COP28 in the Emirates, and thereby maintaining the momentum and the goals that we all have to achieve.
All right, Your Excellency, I'll see you there. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, everyone, for listening.
Thank you very much.
Over there.
Go ahead.
Oh, thank you.
Please welcome UN Climate Action High-Level Champion, COP27, Dr. Mahmoud Muhyiddin.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for the warm welcome. And I'll take a few minutes of your time to share with you some concerns, but many solutions, some challenges, but many opportunities. Let me start by what the Secretary General of the United Nations shared with us from the United in Science report, emphasizing that the humanity is heading to the uncharted territory of destruction. He mentioned that a few days ago. He mentioned today in his speech at the General Assembly of the United Nations. With all of the problems we have today, there is a great deal of a deficit in trust. And there is a surplus in crises around the world, including the climate crisis. We are here today to provide solutions and scale up finance. And despite a disruptive backdrop that has even increased the price tag used to define extreme poverty by 13%, we still need really the hope to push it further in order to achieve sustainability as outlined in the Paris Agreement and in the SDGs. That backdrop is a painful reminder of why we need a truly holistic approach, one that manages a just, equitable, and practical way forward for fiscal, social, and environmental sustainability. Because sustainability is not only climate action, and climate action is not only mitigation, and mitigation is not only about decarbonization. This reductionist approach that had been adopted for many years is a misleading formula for failure. Not only are adaptation, loss and damage, and finance part of the same equation as outlined in the Paris Agreement, but we need to put that all within the Sustainable Goals framework. After all, climate action is SDG 13. We will not achieve much if we are progressing in climate action and sacrificing more people trapped of poverty or unemployment, or more women and girls to be deprived for their opportunities to thrive and survive. So the solutions that I understand from the many discussions that we have been having, from the non-state actor side that I represent and coordinate with my good friend Nigel Topping here, and the state side that was just presented by the president of COP27, is focusing on the following: a holistic approach to climate. And this means taking all of the elements of climate action together: mitigation, adaptation, loss and file, that I'm afraid to say has been lost in endless discussion, with devastating impact on many people in many communities. Not just in Africa. We don't need really to forget what's happening as we speak to our sisters and brothers in Pakistan. And I'm putting the women and girls first because they happen to suffer more with every disaster take place. So what we're trying to do here is to provide solutions through that holistic approach. Is that feasible? Yes. Is that going to be requiring funding? Yes, more funding than what we have today. And it's not going to be just about the 100 billion that we have never seen in full since their announcement back in 2009 in Copenhagen. And even if we fulfill the 100 billion, it is no more than the 3% of the gap that is required for climate action. I just wonder why developing economies and emerging markets get lectured every now and then, while some of the advanced economies didn't fulfill even 10% of what they promised back in Copenhagen. Only 6 to 7 countries from the advanced economies of the 23 countries had managed to do that. Many countries of the advanced economies didn't do that. Fortunately for some, and fortunately for others, as climate champions, we are under strict rules of not naming and shaming. But a good report from the UK, from ODI, you can just Google it, and you can see the heat map on who delivered and who didn't. Right, okay. It's customary now for any meeting, before I talk to any delegation, I test first their commitment, their track record. So yesterday in a meeting with the Secretary of State of Germany, she promised that they are going to be committing more of funds to the Green Climate Fund and to all climate-related activities. I told her, I believe you, not because I know you personally, because you have a track record. You managed to fulfill not just 100%, but more than 100% during the last 3 years. It's a good guidance of others to follow. Well, you would wonder who should really follow that, but I will not share that. Google that. Or perhaps through the Bloomberg network, you can really get more updates on this. Anyways, so holistic approach, focusing on implementation, action, action, action. Our people around the world, not just in the developing economies of Africa and beyond, are desperate for investments and finance, for opportunities that we have been seeing. As mentioned again by the Secretary General, when we get our act together, there are solutions and there are opportunities and there are jobs created. When we see that in the solar projects in Morocco, in Egypt, in Senegal, all of these projects are creating more jobs than the alternative, and we need to encourage that more. I've been taking unprecedented initiative to take climate action to the regions with the presidency of the COP, the champions, the GFANs. During the last few weeks, we were very busy trying to answer a question raised by my good friend, the Special Envoy of the UN, Mr. Mark Carney, about, well, we have the money, we have the 130 trillion, we need to have pipeline of projects. He put other lists of prerequisites and requirements for investors. But actually, we're very busy, not to complain that we don't have a pipeline of projects, but we knocked on every door possible through the regional economic commissions. Now we have examples, just examples of 70 projects on adaptation and mitigation, ready for engagement, under verification now as we speak with leading investment banks and consultancy firms. And this will be the first item of the agenda of the GFANs when we meet with the chapter of GFANs on Africa. This is a kind of a practical solution. We're not just stopping at the bad behavior and the mishaps and irregularities and the deficits, but we are here to provide solutions and bridging the gaps. It's very much important to focus on investments because so far, 60% of the finance going to climate from all sources to all countries, more than 60% are in debt-based instruments. We need to see more private equity and definitely more concessional finance. And I'm very happy that the managing director of the IMF will be speaking shortly, is emphasizing while the IMF is a lending institution, but for every dollar that is going to be coming from the newly established Resilience and Sustainability Trust Fund is going to be opening doors to private sector through leveraging mechanism. So that will be for crowding in, not crowding out, and to enhance the role of the private sector through public-private collaboration. And we have many other aspects of work. I was very happy. I think the Secretary General of the UN is the first political leader to mention swap mechanisms in his speech yesterday. But we're working hard on debt reduction mechanism, including swaps. And there are many good opportunities on that front, linking them to investments in climate and nature and using KPIs, not just project-based. That will open the way for more opportunities. We're working hard as well with many leaders in the field to establish carbon credit markets. We appreciate the leadership of many advanced economies, including in Europe, but my colleagues, including Bugulu, the director for Africa, my good friend Nigel, and others, have been convening many meetings in order to put the new standards more suitable for the needs of developing economies and emerging markets to make them part of this new world of finance. We need to align our budgets as well. All of what I said now will not really fly high unless the budget of the state is fully aligned with sustainability, including all of the aspects related to the SDGs and definitely on climate action. One final matter is related to the investments in ESG. I was asked, and I'm delivering, on behalf of many ministers of finance and many of their advisors and many of the non-state actors, keen to see ESG investment better for them in availing opportunities for finance. We have heard and read about greenwashing. And we need really to fix that, and we need to have the standards. And I'm happy that the Secretary General of the UN commissioned Minister McKenna to produce a report on the standards, procedures, and code, and we look forward to the outcomes of this report. But that will not be enough. The other aspect is that many Africans and many developing economies official call today green exclusion. By that, there is high costs of obtaining finance through ESG because you need to have more time for verification and more costs as well of getting the transaction done. That needs really to be fixed as well through competition, better standards, and disclosure and transparency. So the list is long: holistic approach, implementation, regionalization, localization of actions, and finance. I can say finance 7 times because these are the 7 approaches and proposals that we have, but this definitely will bore you. So just imagine that you heard finance 7 times because every aspect that we are working on requires this kind of funding going forward. Having said that, as an Egyptian, as a proud African and an Arab, belonging to the Mediterranean and above all, a citizen of this world, I look forward to your participation in Sharm el-Sheikh. There are a lot of ideas, suggestions, solutions. None of them will happen without your partnership and without your support and building your excellent achievement and the track record of those who managed to keep it on the right side. Thank you so much.
Please welcome Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund, Kristalina Georgieva, Executive Vice President for the European Green Deal at the European Commission, Frans Timmermans, Managing Director and CEO of the Macquarie Group, Shamara Wickramanayaka, and our moderator, Editorial Director of Bloomberg New Economy, Eric Schatzker.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I had a few preparatory remarks to make, but let's get right into it, don't you think?
Absolutely.
Kristalina, I want to start with you because I think it's important to diagnose the problem. We are, of course, talking about the race to mobilize capital, to climate mitigation and adaptation, largely in the developing world. We just heard from Dr. Mohildin that endless discussion is one of the obstacles. Why isn't enough climate capital finding its way to the developing world? Where, Kristalina, is the system failing?
Well, let me first say that the very big definition of the problem is that we are sleepwalking into being cooked. It is like a little frog sitting in water. We lift up the temperature. The frog is very happy until it is dead. So kind of time for the frog to jump out. And the way I see the problems on financing, the 2 big obstacles. Number 1, we still do not have price on carbon in many places. Only 30% of carbon is being priced, and the average price is $6 a ton. Where it is supposed to be by 2030, at least $75 a ton. I know this year is a very bad time because energy prices have, due to many factors, especially Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but energy prices are going to go down. And when they go down in the next year or 2, we must create the incentive to reduce carbon emissions. Number 2, we are not doing enough to move private capital to developing and emerging economies. Here are the numbers. We need, on average, $3 to $6 trillion to go into climate investments, mitigation, adaptation, transition. How much do we have today? 650 billion, 5 to 10 times less. So we have to discuss how we make it to get private capital that actually exists to get off their butt and go to emerging markets. And I would be, once we get to the solution part, please call me again. I have some ideas.
We are indeed going to get there, but Frans, let me put this question to you. The EU and its member states are, if I'm not mistaken, the largest donors to this component of the net zero effort.
You're not mistaken.
There are two ways of getting people to act, right? You can use a carrot or you can use a stick. I'm turning you into a stick right now because I want you to call out the people who aren't doing enough. Who are they?
Is that going to get them to do more?
Well, at least we'll all know who they are.
Well, I think it's clear that the G20 are responsible for 80% of global emissions, and they're not doing enough to reduce those emissions. And that's an enormous contributing factor to investors being reluctant to invest. Secondly, I believe we should be leveraging public money. We should be using public money to reduce the risks, and we should do that, and then investment will come. And we need to talk to the financial world to know exactly where they see the risks, and then we need to target the public money to reduce it. We have some experience in the EU after COVID with our recovery programs. The leveraging factor of investment was 5 to 10 times, which is something nobody expected. They called it voodoo economics when we launched the plan. It worked. This is what Africa and Asia need today. And what we need to do is to make sure we understand that the Industrial Revolution needs us to create global supply chains so that we not just sell stuff to other continents, but we make sure Africa can make its own green steel, Africa can make its own fertilizer, et cetera, et cetera. And for that, we need investment. And that investment will come. And we also need to change our structures. The financial institutions were created in 1945, Bretton Woods. We are extremely, extremely lucky to have Kristalina where she is, because she is recreating the IMF on the basis of her ideas. But she should be helped by the international community that changes the financial system and brings it into the 21st century.
I love you, Frans. Thank you.
No, but this is what we need. And there's so much money available in principle, but nobody can live in principle. We need to live in investments.
In practice.
Exactly.
A follow-up question for you. The advanced economies of the world have committed to $100 billion a year. We're not there. It's at about $84 billion a year, if I'm not mistaken, at the moment. Where does China belong in this equation?
Well, China, for a long time, the principle in these negotiations has always been that we differentiate the tasks on the basis of where countries are in terms of their development. And China has used that argument to hide behind developing countries and saying, we're a developing country. So we have a common goal, but we need to go at it in a differentiated way. But China by now is responsible for almost 30% of global emissions. You cannot keep hiding behind other countries. You need to take that responsibility collectively. And step by step, we're getting there. When the United States and China reached an agreement on that in Glasgow, that was really, really a milestone. And that was the first recognition of China that they really also needed to take their own responsibility in this. And another development I want to mention, which I think is very positive, if you see what Prime Minister Modi is doing in India, he's not saying we're going to reduce very quickly our emissions in certain energy sectors. No, he's saying our growth will be in renewables without emissions. And he's now talking about 600 gigawatts of renewable energy. I mean, this is revolutionary. That's where we need to take the world. And that needs investment, sharing of technology. It will attract a lot of international companies that will be interested in investing in India. We need to make sure as public authorities that we create the right environment for that. That's our task. We will never have enough public money to make these investments, but we do have enough public money to create the right environment for it.
Shamara Kristalina, he makes a good stick, don't you think?
Absolutely, yes.
Shamara, Kristalina mentioned at the outset in her remarks that in addition to an unrealistic, let's call it, price for carbon, the real problem in mobilizing capital to emerging markets is that not enough private capital has been unlocked. Now, there are many solutions for unlocking private capital. The IMF has its Resilience and Sustainability Trust. Larry Fink, some of you here may recall, last year around the G20 meeting in Vienna, called for a change in thinking at the IMF and the World Bank, they shouldn't be lenders anymore. That's not the right way to approach climate finance. They should be first loss insurers. Let's talk about some of these models, what works and what doesn't. Was Larry Fink right? And even if he was, what else should we be putting on the table?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, if I could just start by acknowledging what the others have been saying, is that it is really urgent for our planet that we deal with emissions from EMD countries, because I think the IEA has done work saying that if we don't abate the emission rate by 2038, we will have used up all the carbon budget that they're assuming we use for the 1.5 degrees. So it's critical that we get into this. Yes, you can use sticks, but you can also use carrots. I'm a little bit into trying to get people to want to participate because they see it's in their interest, because we have this expression, you can lead a horse to water, you can't make it drink. So I think you want to make the horse thirsty. And so this is not, though, inventing a wheel, because it's a well-trodden path. We've done this for decades in infrastructure, bringing, Mark Carney has now mobilized 130 trillion of private capital to invest in renewables or climate change response in emerging countries. But what we need is investable projects is a big challenge. It's not the money. And what you need to do is create the environment, as France says, for attracting that private capital. Now, this private capital is the savings of pensioners, et cetera, retirees, and I've heard global pension funds say we have a responsibility to find them investments that deliver decent return for the risk, and ideally de-risk, and so they want a pretty modest but stable, reliable return. That de-risking takes different shapes everywhere. You've got to tailor it by country, you've got to tailor it by sector. So France was mentioning in India, they've committed to this 600 gigawatts of non-fossil fuel energy by 2030. They've chosen solar as a big way to go in India, makes sense. They have access to a lot of sunshine, they're at 150 gigawatts. So that is moving fast, even though very little money went to EMDs compared to the targets. A big part of that, 3/4 of it, went to India, Brazil, and Vietnam in the last year. Because those countries are creating, it's important to get the enabling environment. So where the commitment is the first thing, setting the targets, as India has done. Then what are the sectors we're going to target for our country? Then what are the frameworks? The UK did it with offshore wind, saying that's going to be where we're going to start. We're going to create this contract for difference mechanism to de-risk early investment. They stuck to it. They provided a pipeline of projects so that money could come and invest. And then the private sector can say, I not only will bring capital, I'll dedicate resource and effort to this because there's a pipeline of investment. They put in place an office in the government to work with you as you did these things. Now the UK has 50%, I think, of the installed offshore wind in the world. And the last round of contracts we bid on for seabed leases with others, we paid £100 million to Her Majesty and another £100 million a year to the Treasury for the pleasure of accessing these leases that won't generate us any revenue for 6 or 7 years till we build these things, because we're confident in the system. We've done this, as I say, in infrastructure with building toll roads in Korea, or now we're looking at e-mobility in India.
Does the model that you're describing that the UK used for offshore wind work as well in the developing world?
Yeah, but you have to take these slowly. So you have early projects that snowball as you catalyze the sector, because the big thing is that they deliver on those early projects, so people have confidence and say, we trust the system. And you could use that. Some countries, Taiwan is very well positioned for offshore wind, India better for solar, some other countries for hydro, some for nuclear. So they have to pick where going to have their impact and their transition, and then what's the framework. As another quick example, in South Korea, when we invested in toll roads, they put in a sort of collar arrangement where, as you built a road, if you went through a floor of traffic, they bottomed out your revenue. If you went through a ceiling, they capped it. And so early on, we bought a lot of money, and they were capping the revenue because it was going well. We had a downturn. They honoured the floor. Tons of money flowed after that because the private sector becomes very confident. So I don't want to hold the time because I know we're busy, but I think it's really important that we collaborate, and I can talk about examples we've done there, with both the developed countries and the DFIs, and importantly, the governments and the partners locally in the developing country. And if I might briefly mention, in India, we've just started this e-mobility project where the Green Climate Fund, to Larry's point, has come in and put in first loss junior equity in of 200 mil. on the basis that we can raise another 200 of equity from the private market. So our funds are doing part of that. We're bringing other private investors, but we're partnering with local Indian companies then to roll this out. We're raising $2 billion of debt against that from local Indian. We're getting the framework set up by the government. So, you know, it's an example of a little early project that over 10 years is going to reduce 9.5 million tonnes of carbon dioxide from the...
Kristalina and Frans, I need to hear from both of you on this subject. Yep. What else works to unlock private capital?
First, let me go back to Larry last year in Venice. When I was at the same meeting, so I heard him and I said, oh, come on, Larry. We are lenders of last resort. We cannot be lender of last resort and first loss guarantee. That cannot work. But he made me thinking. And then I said, wait a minute. We cannot take the risk, but we can lend to our members with the objective of setting up first loss guarantee facilities. And if these facilities are standardized, then investors would be more comfortable to come. So the broader point I want to make here is that orthodox thinking is do not give subsidies to private sector, they need to take all the risk. Except that if we wait the private sector to take all the risk and invest on scale in climate mitigation and adaptation, we will be in a very bad place. So we have to accept that private sector return needs to include also a global component. If private sector is investing in something that benefits the private sector and all the rest of us, isn't it fair for all of the rest of us to help the private sector? So at the IMF, what we are proposing with our Resilience and Sustainability Trust is to lend to governments based on roundtable discussions with public and private sector that defines what are the obstacles for the private sector to invest, and then use the money to remove these obstacles so private sector comes on scale. And I want to say it as loud and clear as I can. It is paramount to think anew, because the problem we have to solve is not only big, it is also time sensitive. So move, move, move.
Speaking of time sensitivity, we don't have much. I want you to end on an optimistic note that inspires everybody in this room to do something.
The thing is, what we don't have is time. That's Kristalina's point. And all our systems are still directed towards a world with horse and carts, etc. We need to move at Formula One speed now. So that means that we need to gear our systems to the speed of the climate change we're seeing. If we do that, we'll come out of this victorious, because what's happening in technology, in new industries, it's mind-boggling. It's so inspiring. We have to unleash this incredible force. If we do that in the next couple of years, we'll fix this.
You want the radical idea to end up very positive, very positive. Get all the development bank presidents in one room. Put in front of them a sheet of paper and ask them to sign with blood that they would only use public money to fund what private money will not fund, say research and development, and to remove barriers for private investment, and measure their success not by how much they lend, but how much they leverage.
There's an idea.
One message I have in this very, very difficult time, because I'm very optimistic in the long run, slightly pessimistic in the next couple of years. We need to tax these windfall profits and give that back to the people and the small and medium-sized enterprises.
Ladies and gentlemen, I wish we could keep going, but please join me right now in thanking Kristalina Georgieva, Frans Timmermans, and Shamara Wickramanayake.
Thank you. Thank you.
Please welcome co-chair of GFANS and board member of Bloomberg Philanthropies, Mark Carney, in conversation with anchor and editor-at-large at Bloomberg Television, Francine Lacqua.
Mark, what a great pleasure to talk to you. I want to talk about deforestation, but first, I was reading this morning, and there are media reports.
Media reports.
Always trust the media, saying that banks may actually leave your climate group GFANS because they worry that it will make them legally vulnerable. What's going on?
Well, first thing, big picture. These banks have made unprecedented commitments alongside asset managers, insurers, asset owners to manage their balance sheets towards net zero. They need frameworks for that, which means net zero plans for financial institutions. We're out consulting on that. We got more than 1,000 responses to it. They need specifics of what they're asking for from companies. They need to manage the phase out of high emission coal and fossil fuels in a responsible way, not push those into the shadows. They need to do all of that, and they need to do it in 45 plus countries in which they're resident. So for that, they need guidance. They need guidance from the IEA in terms of oil and gas, and the IPCC, guidance from science-based targets, Mission Possible, other frameworks for guidance. Guidance in some cases from Mike Bloomberg and Mary Shapiro, myself, in terms of deforestation. We'll talk about coal as well. What they can't have is legally binding strictures, a thing called antitrust that binds in some of those jurisdictions. And there was some guidance, if you will, or strictures that were put out by Race to Zero earlier this summer, which went too far. The clarifications have been issued now. And so the system keeps working. Let me underscore two last points. One is, it's absolutely essential that we have a system that works everywhere in the world. That means not just here in the United States, but it means in Africa. So that's why we have the GFANS Africa network, and we have to have guidance that's consistent with that. And then last point, the net zero data public utility, which is going to be in place by this time next year, will allow all stakeholders to judge not just emissions of financial institutions, but what were their targets, and are they meeting their targets? And that's the kind of accountability we need.
But would you rather a smaller group of banks that are more committed, or a broader church but with less conviction?
Broader church with conviction. I'm going to take option number 3. And that's what we have. And again, that transparency is essential. And last point, we need a global system. We need a system that works in Manhattan and in Malawi.
Talk to me about deforestation. Why is it your big focus now?
Well, it's first thing, GFANS, net zero. We're not going to get to net zero without addressing deforestation. 11% of emissions last year were related to deforestation. Many in this room will know, but unfortunately a lot won't, more broadly, that the world cut down forests the size of Belgium last year alone, and on and on and on. So it adds up to a huge amount of emissions. Of course, that's just the start. It goes to biodiversity. It goes to livelihoods of people. A fifth of the world's population are resident in these ecosystems. 80% of plants and animals are resident. They live there, literally. So it needs to stop. And we're providing guidance with that, and guidance that's consistent with what 140 countries that cover 90% of the world's forests agreed to in Glasgow.
So what are some of the concrete actions that actually governments should take now?
Well, one of the things that in terms of governments, it's to put in place rules and regulations that are consistent with those commitments that they put there. Secondly, one of the things we all need to do, and a lot of people are working on this, is to develop carbon credit markets. That's not the answer, but it is a supplement to the answer. They have to absolutely be high integrity on both the demand and the supply side. Lots of good work has been done to get there. We don't have enough time to talk about it all, but it's important that we take the time to get those right.
What kind of timeline? I mean, again, time is of the essence.
Time is of the essence. Look, the commitment in Glasgow is by 2030 by those 140 countries. Certainly, we need to move from that 11% down to net zero from forestry, if I can put it that way, deforestation and afforestation balance, by that timeline to be broadly consistent with 1.5 degrees. The world has to do a lot more to be consistent as well, but this is a key component. As I say, look, it's more than 1 in 10 of the emissions that's happening today. If we flip it around, it can be part of the solution as well, but first let's stop it being a massive, massive problem.
I mean, this is a concern, especially in certain emerging markets. How do you get them on board?
Well, first thing is a number of them are on board, so they're part of those 140 signatories. But there's a common element here, which is if you're going to stop something, you should start something else. So as we know, a lot of focus rightly on stopping coal generation, but stopping coal generation is met with building up renewables and a bridge and a just transition between the two. Stopping deforestation, moving to afforestation, moving to other forms that can enhance the livelihoods of the people who are there. A lot of cases, these are desperate decisions that are being made for economic reasons of people resident there, and it needs to be a comprehensive strategies that's put in place, which is why we want to shine a light on it and not have finance. We want to have finance contributing to the solution, not the problem.
So concretely, what can finance do? And in this world of high inflation, we're going back to coal, there's a war in Ukraine. Is there a bit of a lack of focus on some of these?
Well, I don't think look, there is a tremendous focus in finance, as I think you know, in terms of getting on the path towards net zero, so measuring their own emissions, and they need to have this component in that measurement, really assess what in their financing chain, the supply chain beyond that, that is related to deforestation, how that can be turned around. So assess and then develop plans and act, and integrate those into these net zero plans. A moment ago, I mentioned that we're coming out with these comprehensive net zero plans for financial institutions. Everybody in GFANZ will be expected to follow those, and we're highlighting that deforestation has to be integrated as part of that.
But have you seen any lack of appetite in getting behind these because of higher inflation and some of the world concerns?
No, we do not see lack of appetite in terms. Look, one of the solutions to energy inflation is clean energy. One of the solutions to slower growth is the type of investment that we need here. So, look, these financial institutions are working flat out. There will be differences, though. When you get 500 of anything, there is going to be a distribution in terms of how well people perform. Institutions perform ultimately, but again, that's why we're moving at speed. And again, thanks to President Macron, Mike Bloomberg, the OECD, the IMF, the UN, supporting this net zero data public utility, which means that everyone in this room, everyone watching and beyond, can track who's doing well and who's falling behind.
So this week was also not without controversy. Is it right that a head of a big institution or heads of big institutions don't fully endorse the science behind climate change?
Wow, look at the time. Well, look, I'm not a scientist, but I take scientific. We took scientific advice when I at the tail end of my governorship in terms of the COVID strategy response, and so certainly looked at that advice and looked at the responsibilities there. I'm not an expert in poverty. I know the responsibility of the World Bank is to end world poverty. Part and parcel of ending world poverty is providing the global public goods that are necessary to address deforestation and more broadly climate change.
Mark Carney, thank you so much.
Thank you, Francine.
And now we have climate justice activist Shia Bastida. She's not even 21 years old yet. She was born and raised in Mexico as part of an indigenous community, but moved to New York City when she was 13 years old because her hometown was flooded. Determined to take action, she co-founded Re-Earth Initiative in 2020, an international youth-led organization that's focused on making the climate movement accessible to everyone. So please join me in welcoming Shia to the stage.
Thank you so much, Jane. That was very nice of you to do. My name is Shia Bastida. I'm a climate justice activist, one of the organizers of the 2019 climate strike that brought over 300,000 young people to the streets. Woo! For the upcoming COP27, I'm going to be 20 years old. And frankly, it is very surprising that COPs have been going on for longer than I've been alive, and for longer than most of the youth in the world have been alive. But now things are different because there is more urgency to include frontline communities, to include climate justice. And I believe that the reason why we haven't been able to get there is because we haven't allowed ourselves to imagine that better world. And we cannot imagine a better world without youth and frontline communities as stakeholders, because we bring stories that haven't been shared in these spaces. And youth also have the conviction to ask for a fossil-free world. We need a fossil fuel treaty. We need to stop the destruction of nature and stop the expansion of the systems that have allowed us to get into this place in the first place. And we cannot build this world without the finance to frontline and youth, because we have been mobilizing from the grassroots. The change is not going to come only from here. It has to come from the bottom up. And every single movement in history has shown that. We need $100 billion a year promised to the Global South, and we are going to fight for that. Last but not least, I want to say that I know we have the stories, the solutions, the data to achieve 1.5 degrees of warming, and it's scientifically proven that we can achieve it by 2030 with the existing solutions. What we need now is a promise that my kids in 2100, my grandkids in 2100 are going to have a safe world to live on, that we are all going to acknowledge that our purpose on this earth is to take care of it, and most importantly, that we are going to be the last generation to be dependent on fossil fuels. I know all of this is hard to imagine, but we have to embody the realization that we are in an era of transformation. And I invite all of you to be part of this generation of change. Thank you.
Please welcome Chair of the UN High-Level Expert Group on Net Zero Commitments of Non-State Entities, the Honorable Catherine McKenna, CEO of the European Climate Foundation, Laurence Tubiana, and our moderator, UN Climate Action High-Level Champion COP26, Nigel Topping.
So the good news is that net zero commitments now cover over 90% of the global economy. The bad news is that fewer than a fifth of net zero targets set by national and subnational governments align with the science, and only about a third of the largest public corporates with net zero targets align with the science. They're the ones in the race to zero, right? So it's not surprising that whilst we've got this sort of headline commitment, we haven't got enough granularity, and so we're still way off track. Emissions continue to rise. Vulnerable communities are fighting to survive. So as the high-level champions, we think it's time for a pivot to integrity and implementation so that people make good promises and then make good on those promises, and a pivot to a more holistic approach that Mahmoud's talked about so that we put adaptation, resilience, and loss and damage on the same importance and urgency as mitigation. So we're doing a lot this week to promote those. We've launched the Adaptation and Resilience Breakthroughs, if you like, the sister framework to the 2030 breakthroughs on mitigation that have now gained good traction, and we're all going to Pittsburgh to talk about with ministers later in the week. We've launched a report on the pivot point, the pivot from relying on voluntary initiatives to making sure that good regulation underlines everything and the rules of the global economy align with the Paris Agreement objectives. And we've launched a report on the progress, the good, the bad, and the ugly of the race to zero and the race to resilience. Mike Bloomberg mentioned a lot of the numbers earlier, and there's a lot of good case studies of progress on resilience and mitigation in the two races in the reports. But I want to come to Catherine and Laurence to talk about this need to pivot to integrity and implementation. And Catherine, you're in this unique role chairing this really important group that the Secretary General launched in COP26. So tell us a little bit about, I know you haven't published your recommendations yet, but some of the key things that you're learning with this very diverse global group around some of the challenges about making good promises and then making good on promises.
Look, I think that the Secretary General has been really clear. He is concerned about greenwashing, and I think more importantly, he's concerned about action. And we need more action. We just see the images around the world, including just now from Puerto Rico. And so it's really, how do we match ambition with action? That means having clarity around standards and what people are doing. Transparency, a lot of the data is just not there. You also, things like we have heard from folks about lobbying. Don't lobby positively for climate action, because that helps government. Don't lobby negatively against climate action. Equity and justice, we need a huge quantum of money. We need $3 trillion to go to clean, in particular in less developed countries. It's just not going there. So I think all of these issues have come up in different ways. And then, of course, there's a limit to voluntary initiatives. As you know, it's great, and it's great that we're seeing these initiatives pop up. There's a lot of companies, financial institutions, cities and regions that aren't even covered by them. And also, you need to have consequences. And so that is going to be a big part of our report. We have an amazing group. I'm not going to release it here. We are still working on our recommendations. And thanks to everyone who played into it, because a lot of folks around the world were engaged, and our group is very diverse, and it's gender balanced, which is also awesome.
And when will that be published? Because a lot of people will be looking with keen eye on that.
So we have been told that we need to deliver it to the Secretary General well in advance of COP. We had an in-person meeting. We've done a lot of really good progress. So I think it's up to the Secretary General, but I think we can expect it'll probably be launched at COP.
Okay, great. Thank you. So, Laurence, you've been at the heart of this. You're the prototype. You're the model for a high-level champion. You're the high-level champion #1, the first one. And you created so much the structure of the Marrakesh Partnership and really modeled the focus on ambition and action. So, but a lot's happened since then. And you're still very involved at the ECF. And you get to scan the whole kind of ecosystem of different actors working to accelerate action. So tell us, from your perspective, what are the main gaps that need to be addressed now to make sure that we have high integrity promises and then that those are delivered on?
I think, and because we don't have a global government or an international court of justice that could imply that people who are companies or government that don't respect their commitment are punished. So we don't have that. So we have to invent something else. And the Paris Agreement was, we have to exert peer pressure and transparency. And because, again, we have to shape the expectation that the trend is there, the transformation of the economy is at that decarbonization path. That has to be just transition, and we have to look at each other to see it's really happening. So transparency is a key element of integrity. And that's why now we are in the implementation phase. We know these targets, and thanks to you, Nigel, they have been really encompassing many, many more actors last year in Glasgow. And now we have to see how concrete the plans are and who can share this data. And it's important because at the end of the day, we will need, for the non-state actors, government regulations, but you cannot have regulation without knowing what you have to regulate. And that is an enormous effort we have to make, and that's why, and I say many times, government would be following. Of course, we have big leadership and things that are really interesting, but if the society, the civil society doesn't, in a way, keep the government, the companies, the banks accountable, there is always very good reason to delay. And just the actual crisis on all fronts just is a big opportunity to delay. So that's why transparency is a safety net. And for me, it's a safety net of the Paris Agreement, clearly. So it's really important, and I think there are people all the actors who believe that finally there is no way out of this path to the transformation of the economy. And beliefs and representation and perception plays a big role, in particular in the global market.
And Essentially, one of the dynamics which you set up with the creation of this whole non-state actor movement was what we call the ambition loop, that sometimes governments lead, sometimes private sector or parts of private sector lead, and I think nowhere is that better manifested today than the fact that we now know that the combustion engine is basically dead technology within 10 years, when in Paris people were still projecting it out to 2080, and that's been a combination of civil society campaigning for clean air, against asthma for their kids, and some mayors being really bold, and some vehicle manufacturers, and then that creates the political space. So we need to see that amongst...
that famous story about the fraud, about the quality, the emissions of particular vehicles, unlock the problem of the electric vehicle, finally. So we never know what will happen, but if transparency and civil society is pushing for, this is an accelerator loop you are talking about.
So I'm afraid we're at the end of time. Couple of quick reflections. Catherine, you talked about the importance of positive lobbying. In fact, that's one of the things that was incorporated in the Race to Zero this year, was a 5th P on persuading, like using the power of public affairs to persuade in line. I think so. We think that what we need is to get everybody who's not in the Race to Zero and Race to Resilience in the Race to Zero and the Race to Resilience. We look forward to hearing your findings, and then we'll take them into consideration as we keep improving going forward. I think we're all agreed that the sunshine treatment of transparency is critical so that people can see what the targets are, have they been verified, are they in line with science, what is the plan, is it consistent with the targets, and then what are the results of implementing that plan. And all of that needs to a change in the rules of the game, so we have that whole systemic flip.
And it's every year, it's not for 2030, it's not just a plan for 2030, it's what happened 2023, 2024. That's really important. What is happened immediately. And that, of course, is consistent with the targets. And
that's also consistent with the Glasgow a commitment, which we haven't seen a lot of yet, to update plans every year. And I'll just end on a final note in terms of this public-private partnership. One thing I hear from Denmark, where they have, it's now enshrined in law that the climate policies will be reviewed every year with the private sector, and that's leading to much more confidence also amongst policymakers. So I think that faster iteration of thinking about ambition is also helpful, given we're in this disruptive period of radical
I saw that in Canada. When we brought in carbon pricing, which was really tough, we actually had business calling for it. So it really helps government to actually do really hard things to see an ambition loop. So I don't know, maybe stay tuned here, who knows? But our report is coming out, and I think it's going to be really solid, but it's really going to help because we don't have time. And I don't need to say this to anyone in this room, but we are running around out of time, and we need to reduce emissions, and we need to scale up financing right now.
Great. With that, I'm going to call this brief panel to an end. Thank you very much, Catherine. Thank you very much, Laurence.
Thanks. Good job, Mike.
Please welcome Governor of California, the Honorable Gavin Newsom, in conversation with anchor and editor-at-large Bloomberg Television's Francine Lacqua.
Everybody. Hello, hello. All right.
All right, Governor, thank you.
A lot of people back to back.
There's a lot of people, and we're here to talk climate change.
I'm glad I came to the right place.
You've rightly said that California is on the front lines of the climate crisis.
Yes.
It's of course, the 5th largest economy in the world.
On its way to being 4th, eat your heart out, Germany, with respect, say.
What's the one thing that you've implemented in cities, in parts of California, that you want others to replicate?
Well, I think what we just did. California just took the most bold, most comprehensive, the most significant scale climate policy and ambition in arguably world history. Our carbon neutrality goals, the fact that we codified an executive order I did 2 years ago on guaranteeing that all new vehicle purchases or alternative fuel purchases by 2035, 3,200-foot setbacks for oil and gas operations, of which, of course, the oil industry just filed a referendum and then got all the support in the world. Their talking points in the Wall Street Journal editorial pages today only reinforces California's leadership. And that's a point of principle and pride. I couldn't be more proud of my legislature and the people of our state that made that possible.
it's noble and it's a noble cause, will you be able to keep the lights on? Because infrastructure needs a lot of electricity for everything you want to do.
Well, look what happened in Texas last year. I mean, they doubled down on stupid. Coal, natural gas, 3 days they couldn't keep the damn lights on. $100+ billion of economic damage. Hundreds of people died. 10x the amount of gigawatts that were impacted. 4x the number of households were impacted. I mean, that's the question asked. Why the hell are they doubling down on the policies that created those conditions when we actually survived? There are no backouts. And you know why we survived? Installed battery storage. Our largest power plant in the state of California is batteries, close to 4,000 megawatts. And we're just getting started. That is 1,500% more megawatts than we had just 2.5 years ago. We're just winding up. The opportunities are endless. The abundance of innovation and entrepreneurial spirit that's behind that is something we want to capture. We want to dominate in this next global industry. We are not interested in the failed policies of the past and recreating the 19th century. And the compare and contrast of California and our policies and our acceleration in this space versus all these other states is going to be a sight to see over the next few decades.
Do you have any concerns about the grid being able to take it? You've had issues when there are heat waves.
I didn't sleep for 10 nights. Of course I have concerns. But my biggest concern is the status quo. We had 1,000 record-breaking temperatures this month, 1,000. We had 125-degree temperatures in California just this month. The extreme heat, the extreme drought, the extreme weather. The drought leading to a reduction in megawatts. Mega droughts impact megawatts as it relates to hydroelectricity. The extreme heat that's led to unprecedented number of people dying because of heat stress and health. What's happening with the status quo makes me a hell of a lot more nervous than our acceleration of this ambition to action. And I think, look, if there's one thing that California is doing, it's moving from ambition to action. Everybody's running over themselves to sign a new MOU or to have new goals. California not only backed them up with CARB, the California Air Resources Board, arguably the most powerful regulatory agency in America. And I say that not naively because Ronald Reagan afforded, when he created CARB in 1967, a waiver from federal rules and regulations that allow us to set the market for tailpipe emissions and many other things. And we codified these rules and regulations, but we backed them up. And here's the long-winded point. With $54 billion of investments to move from ambition to application of our ideals, to get in the how business. And I say this with love and respect, but when Joe Biden, I mean it, done more on this, the $369 billion that he just did, which is extraordinary. But their big announcement the other day for electric vehicles was sending California, exact number, $56.8 million. We just passed a $10 billion California alone electric vehicle infrastructure package. So we mean business. We're at a whole nother scale than any other state in the country.
Talk to me about nuclear. So it looks like California's nuclear plant will stay alive another 5 years.
Yep.
Does that mean that you can have no blackouts in the next decade?
No, look, I mean, Mother Nature's raced ahead against our most, I mean, we had pessimistic forecasting 2 years ago that now we have to throw out because we changed it all. We said, boy, this will never happen. And boom, 1,000 records breaking, 10-day flex alert. I mean, we had extreme heat dome over the western United States in August of 2020. 2 days, we thought, well, we'll luckily never see that again in our life. 10 days, 52,000 megawatts at peak. So we'll extend the life of a nuclear plant that runs about 2,250 megawatts. Batteries ran at peak during the critical peak hours to save us from blackouts. Here's the nuclear plant, 9% of base energy, at about 2,250. And we were able to draw down on our battery storage 3,600 or 3,360 megawatts. I mean, you figure this out. Where's the transition? Where's the opportunity? But the principal reason we extended the life was to de-risk. We now recognize that we're being stressed. The grid is being stressed in a way that we never could have imagined. We want to de-risk this transition. But I cannot tell you what we're doing with electric vehicles. They're just batteries on wheels. The bidirectional technology, the vehicle-to-grid technology, the opportunity to people to plug in those off-peak hours and then to export that back to the grid in off-peak hours. Now, we're not just exporting dollars, they're importing them from the grid, now back into people's pockets. The opportunities to reimagine the grid of the future presents itself anew in California, and that's pretty profound and exciting. And look, we want to be in the future business. California is in the future business. 7.8% GDP growth last year. Nation's best of any large state. Bloomberg, this time last year, did a 5-year analysis of California's economic output, 21%, beating every Western democracy, as we are radically changing the way we produce and consume energy. I don't think we can do this. I know we can do this. And California is not going to cede the future to fossil fuel interests. We're not going to cede the future to stale talking points in editorial boards that have been writing the same damn editorial for 20 years. And we're not going to subsidize the industry that's created the damn mess that we're in today any longer. We're going to accelerate the transition. I'm serious about this. Just enough. I can't take the talking points from the right any longer. And these, wingnuts on Fox News. We got to call them out. Enough. These guys have created a world that's, of extreme, not just, by the way, extreme heat and extreme drought, extreme polarization and the extreme rhetoric. Democracy's now on the damn ballot, not just climate. All of this is connected. We can't allow them to win this debate and define the terms of this debate. They have dominated the narrative for too long. Facts don't rule, illusion rules. The facts are no longer on their side for one reason, and you've heard this 1,000 times. Mother Nature's joined the damn conversation. And, Rob Watson said it better than anyone else. She's just chemistry, biology, and physics. She bats last, she bats 1,000. And if you don't believe in climate and you don't believe in science, you believe your own eyes. 3 towns in California have been burnt to the ground, paradise. They're all wiped off the map. Lifestyles, traditions, being wiped off the map as these guys are sitting there saying we want more subsidies for the same damn industries that have destroyed these planets and created the planet and created these damn conditions. Enough. We need to call it out. And that's what we're trying to do in California at scale. And they're not used to this. The oil industry tried to take us out with our climate package, 40 bills I decided, and they lost. And it's the first of many losses for the oil industry. And with all due respect, that's not an industry I'd double down and invest in. Michael Bloomberg's absolutely right. The new CRT for these guys is ESG. I mean, this is a serious moment. As I said, dumb as we want to be, and these guys are doubling down on stupid.
Do you think U.S. citizens are ready for this? There's inflation. Is there a concern? What do you say to a single mom who says, look, I'm worried about the cost of living. I'm worried about inflation.
I say, you don't have to sit in line at a gas station anymore worrying about the price of the pump. I mean, I say to a mom, you don't have to worry about what's on the news and, petro-dictators and petro-politics and lousy foreign policy and dumb decisions we're making any day. I say to that mom, your kid that's choking up because we're all heating up can breathe clean air, fresh air. You're not worried about them getting asthma, not worried about cancer pollution that's out there. I say to that mom, you can raise their kids and they can actually go outside in a playground and not worry about extreme heat index. I say to that mom, you get that electric vehicle, it's not only more abundant, it's not only more reliable, but the cost of operating are substantially lower. I say to that mom, that's fresh air progress versus this stale air of normalcy, which we're in right now. So I say to that mom, you care about your kids, then you care about this future.
How do you convince Americans to buy electric cars now when the infrastructure is still behind? Again, is it a problem of timeline?
No, 16% of all new cars in California are already electric vehicles. Give me a break. Policy is an accelerator. The world, in California, Elon, to his credit, took advantage of over $1 billion of state tax subsidies, hundreds of millions of dollars in loans from all of you, at least federally. But because we established a policy, it accelerated. And the world he invented is about to compete against him. Everyone's moving in this business. The cost curve is dropping significantly. And the free market, free enterprise will establish a framework to quadruple down on infrastructure and create opportunity. Old gas station attendants will see this opportunity and they'll take the backyard and instead of having that Jiffy Lube thing, they'll put in electric charging stations and you'll see this thing take off. I have no concerns whatsoever about what's happening in innovation in this space. We just want to dominate it. If for all these other states have no interest in that, fine. Eat your heart out, Texas. Fine.
You've mentioned carbon capture. How do you get it to work at scale?
It was the chessboard. art of the deal, art of the possible. We had to move a lot of things with our big, ambitious, bold goals that we were able to pursue and advance the last few years, and carbon capture is important. Can't be ideological about any of this. Got to be open to argument, interested in evidence. Carbon capture, sequestration, air capture. We have a lot of California-based air companies in that space. So that was part of it. But we had an environmental justice component of that as well, as it relates to we're not promoting carbon capture by then allowing more production. We see a fossil-free future. And we've established firm guidelines and deadlines in that space. And we want to accelerate. But again, we want to deal with demand and supply. I recognize I got here in a car that uses gas. I'm not naive about this, all right? I'm not claiming purity. Society becomes how we behave. So it's the demand, supply, and finding that balance and accelerating this transition through good policy. And I think California is approximating, with humility, approximating the right balance.
Are you hoping that more US states look to California and want to replicate what you're doing?
I'm not hoping, I know they are. Thank you, Ronald Reagan. Remember him? The Republican Party should learn about this guy. He established the Air Resources Board in 1967 and afforded us the ability to have a federal waiver, whichever Republican presidents tried to get rid of. And the next one we'll try again. But it allows us to move markets. And there was this guy named Richard Nixon, another big progressive Republican, that codified that in the Clean Air Act in 1970. Republican Party, the current Republican Party, Wall Street Journal should look those two folks up. Learn about them. Learn about their history. Learn about their policy making. It's interesting. Because of those two, I'm able to answer your question affirmatively. Yes, there's 17 other states that have joined us consistently on our clean air promise and our vehicle transition in the past. That's why when we moved forward the 2035 goal, Bill Ford jumped, put out a tweet, said we're not going to cede the future. We joined California. GM, they were a little more stubborn, but Mary, to her credit, came on board. They're all coming on board. Trains left the station, folks, so it's who is going to dominate in this space? Who's going to get market share in this space? We have 43 manufactured EV companies in California today, 200 headquartered EV companies and component parts. Today, it was one of our top exports. We have 6 times as many green-collar jobs than we do fossil fuel jobs already, and we're a big fossil fuel state already. What more? I mean, enough. Enough. Evidence is there, the opportunity is there, and it's part of the DNA of the entrepreneurial spirit that defines the best of, I would argue, America, but we have to rediscover ourselves, learn a little bit about our history, and certainly the DNA that defines the best of California.
I mean, you're so optimistic and so energized by this. Why are world leaders so pessimistic about our future?
We're so situationally based. I mean, situational values have created the problems we're in today. We're so consumed moment by quarter. Maybe we bring in a little sustainable values, not just Mother Nature, but the markets again. And we work our way through. We weather the moment. We weather the short-term critique. But these guys are losing the debate. Mother Nature is leaping ahead of us. California is exhibit 1, 2, 3, A, B, whatever the hell, you fill in the blank. We're in the front lines of this with the tip of the spear of this new reality. And again, I say it, you cannot deny what you see with your own eyes. And when you see 125 degrees in September, with respect, that wasn't my thermometer, the Democratic Party's thermometer. It wasn't the Republican Party's. It's damn facts. It's reality. There's certain lived realities that have caught up to these troglodytes. And that's what they are. I said that about the Wall Street Journal Ed Board today. They had a cheap shot editorial today that literally was the talking points, that were argued against our bills last week. There's not even any imagination left with these folks. And we've got to start calling it out. I know that everyone gets about all that because we all want to get along. But people are dying. It's costing us fortune. How many hundreds of billions of dollars are we willing to waste every single year because of our neglect? And they claim to be fiscal conservatives? Do you care about God's great vision, Mother Nature's majesty? We've lost 20% of our sequoias. I mean, these are the oldest sentinels on the planet. 20% have been lost the last 2 years. Don't you care about this stuff? Honestly, who are you? Does it just matter to win short-term debates at other people's expenses, our kids and grandkids? But I'm serious about this. Guys like me come and go. We're a dime a damn dozen. It's 50 other of me, 49 other governors. I got a moment in time. I'm not going to live in peril of regretting not to have met this moment. And I'm sick and tired of the other side. I'm sick and tired of the stale arguments on the other side. So forgive the passion, but we're putting passion to action. And that's what I want to leave you to understand. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you. I like the audience.
I feel like I'm talking to someone who's going to run for president.
No. No, I want to do something for a living. I like being governor of California. I can get stuff done.
You'll get a lot more done if you ran.
Biden's done a magnificent job getting anything done.
You're definitely not
he's
running.
done an unbelievable job. But no, subnational. We have 240 subnational organizations that are on board with our MOU under 2. There's a lot of great, like I think Tom Friedman said it best. You don't like the way the world looks? When you're standing up, stand on your head and go local. Remarkable things are happening at local level all across this nation. And so let's keep that up, bottom up.
Governor, thank you.
God bless. Thank you very much. Thank you all. Thanks for having me. Appreciate
Thank you,
it.
Governor.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, it's also now my pleasure to give the floor to His Excellency Gustavo Petro, President of the Republic of Colombia. The President will speak in Spanish, and a direct translation is available on your headsets.
Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon.
Founder
of Bloomberg Philanthropies, Michael Bloomberg. Excellent heads of states, leader of governments, civil society, philanthropists, businessmen, climate activists, secretary, heads of missions at the United Nations, champions of the high level of climate change at the UN and COP26, Niall Topping, champion of the high level of climate action on COP27, Mahmoud Molendin, media, and the news. In the last few years, for me, this has been a constant subject. I had to introduce it in political discourse in Colombia when I was having a campaign in Bogota. While in the Bogota government, I tried to build a coordinated urban plan with a climate crisis, but it cost me my candidacy because we were fired. But this was a central axis of my presidential campaign. Several years have gone by since. In 2009, when we started discussing this in Colombia, but things are getting worse. There were many events besides COPs. There was a kind of a Hollywood party around the climate crisis in Colombia and in the world, but I believe that we are now really of non-return. We haven't listened to science. We have not listened, not because politics is incompetent. We need to understand this to to be able to attack this. It is not that politics is incompetent, which makes the humanity at a point of no return, but it's rather powerful and specific economic interests. Somehow, capitalism as such, as we know it, began in the world during the Industrial Revolution when we started using fossil fuel, water, steam. The steam engine that began the Industrial Revolution was produced by using boilers with carbon, first carbon, then oil, which then became the great energy engines of a specific way of producing for humanity and consumer, a specific relationship between humans to face production and consumption, and that's what we call capitalism. I think that the fact that we haven't faced this facet of the problem leads us to not understand what happens in the world. If we follow the logic of capitalism, which is to produce more in order to sell more so that the owners gain more and more money, this is a production logic which then leads us to use their energy engines more and more, and these engines use carbon and oil. Then, of course, today it is clear that some economic structure and certain processes in production during the history of humanity have led us to the climate crisis. So you must ask yourselves, can we stop this logic? Somehow, and perhaps naively, we can ask whether capital should make less money, or if we look at it a little bit more realistically, does capital, the way that we produce more and more, consume more and more, and make more and more money, can that change its own technical engine of accumulation of carbon and oil towards what we call clean energy? Can we abandon carbon and oil as basic commodities as for production? We cannot answer that question, really. Can capital overcome the limit imposed in terms of life of the intensive use of carbon and oil? If you study classic economic theory, which studied capital, classical thinking in economics for 2 years, which were forgotten by the dominant economic theory in the world in the last decades, you could see that if from that view, technology is only introduced in the production process from the view of capital if it's more productive. In other words, can it generate more revenue? Any technology that does not generate revenue is discarded by capitalism. So the question becomes, are technologies for clean energy able to be more productive than technology that use fossil energy, so that capitalism can introduce them to maybe make more money? There is no answer to that. No one can say one way or the other that there is thinking leading us to for a clean, decarbonized energy to be more productive than the fossil economy. So we don't have that answer, and we have to wonder, does capitalism, can it overcome this climate crisis, or will it lead us to the destruction of humanity? So then we are at the door of enormous political tension in the world that aren't necessarily peaceful in the end stage of what we call climate crisis or climate disaster. At the UN, our speeches, the UN narrative really built throughout COPs, which usually take place in cities that are sponsored by big powers of the fossil economy, try and sell you a theory that may have some basis, but you must question it. Because climate crisis is caused by a commercial way of production, the market itself could solve it. This extends the theory, this paradigm that has dominated the countries, ministers of economy, governors, academics. A paradigm that is born out of a model that was invented by Leon Balras. He didn't really think this would become the dominant thinking. But he was simply trying to respond to the classic political economy, his questions about capitals and its possible limits. He was able to build a mathematical model in which the market, the free market, would lead us to a maximization of well-being for people and for society. It is the theory of the general well-being. When we talk about maximization, we always talk about math. Calculus to maximize the derivatives to equal zero. That's how you maximize. He then used that differential calculus to try and build continuous functions using supply, demand to reach a maximum level, and concluded that if the market was free, then it could maximize individual and social well-being. This theory was the theoretical answer to the political economy at the beginning of the 20th century, and it irradiated throughout the world as the paradigm to be followed, and if you did not follow it, it was like a sin. Had anybody or if anybody dared see it differently, if anyone said something that didn't follow that kind of content, you have experienced throughout all these decades the application of this thesis. It has been presented by the media, by experts in economics and those who are not experts. It was presented as a scientific law. This mathematical paradigm, this mathematical complexity has been used, in fact, to support the scientific basis of such a proposition, which is not really scientific, but rather ideological. It's an ideological position, like Lambadieu, the philosopher, used to say. The intensive use of mathematics sometimes does not legitimize science, but rather, in some cases, in human sciences, what it does is it legitimizes ideologies. And that's the ideology that we've been living under in theory, in academics, and the economic schools, and in the daily politics, and in culture as well. So, when scientists discover, this is what happens when scientists discover climate change, who are not politicians. The expert panels have shown us that this economic paradigm has been destroyed. It was the opposite of what was preached, by, which was that the free market would maximize social well-being. But we saw that if we keep going, we will be extinct as humans. That is a brutal collapse of the ideology and of economy. This puts us in a difficult scenario because we're not sure what to do. We don't really know what to do at this final stages of the human species, because what science has told us, we do not act and we continue as we are, the false infinity that Hegel was mentioning, to produce more, to consume more, and believe that makes us happier. The more we consume, the happier we are. If we keep on going, this will only lead to the definite disappearance of the human species, and not in millennia from now. I think Stephen Hawking was mentioning 200 years, but today's scientists that survive him would shorten that time. Of course, a scientific thesis would tell the oil industry or the risk capital funds that really dominate the economic structure of the world. What do they say to people's beliefs? That we, as we could show you here, they would say that we're surrounded by things that were made from oil and or carbon, like this speaker or this watch. If our way of life, some more luxurious, some less luxurious, is, for centuries, by these energy engines of accumulation of capital, which are carbon and oil. If we talk about escapes by throwing something into the atmosphere, we could cool it. Some consensual lies would lead us to believe we're moving towards transition, but that never starts. Then automatically we are led towards where we have nothing more to do. So why is there no social or political action in the world? What it means, because we would have to make big changes that are hard to do, because our daily lives would be affected, whether you're living in a powerful economy. If we to be able to get rid of oil and carbon quickly, we would have to change our way of life, and that's almost unthinkable. What would humanity look like? What would that economy look like? We can talk about it, we can write about it. Using the UN language, we could say it's easy if it's consensual, but we can talk about it, decarbonized economy. But what is that? Outside saying, outside the fact that it has no carbon or of oil, what does it look like? What kind of productivity does that have? What is the social relationships that are established by people around an economy that is has this new way of producing and consuming? It's capitalism, still the same, under the inertia of keeping an ideology. What we've come to in the last few years, think that the market would become internal. It's an externality that all of a sudden appears out of the blue. This climate crisis, if you talk about market prices, this cost of the climate crisis would be called carbon taxes. Could that alone resolve our problem? Well, that is the 1989 Nobel Prize of Economics theory. That's the basis under which the UN and the governments of the world are moving under. Even carbon taxes aren't used all over. They haven't been agreed or accepted in this neoliberal thinking that has been created to try to resolve a climate crisis, even in an argument. However, it's quite difficult to understand rationally how what the market has produced can be resolved and solved by the market. In fact, it's almost like running away, because if we really think about it, if we want to solve the climate crisis that mean a total change of technology, of consumption and production, then we would have to look at it from another space, which is not the market, which should be regulated. And think about just that, what that means in politics, that sentence. To start new planning, the public power, the people's power, it's not just national power, it would have to be multilateral and global if we wanted to, in the time that we have left, make these transformations we need to make. That would mean need enormous investment of money and finances to take these leaps and build the indicators of a true decarbonized economy, which is what we're doing. Are we doing that? I think the answer is we are not. Lobbies, the oil and carbon lobby, and the industries, which is the fossil economy, 90% of the world economy, is powerful enough to make this very irrational, politically speaking, because knowing, as science tells us, that we're at the crisis of civilization, we're still doing nothing. We just slow down the process. We make up ideologies like that movie that talked about this, Don't Look Up, right? That movie. But we play the ostrich and hide our head in the sand. We're not facing the problem. We go from COP to COP to COP until the time is over. Political tension is clear. We can see that today, of course, and people suffer more and more the climate crisis, the catastrophe, because this isn't just a lie. Every day, more and more, we see more and more facts. Some are very visible. No water, you lose nutrients, you lose the natural balance in many places in the world that produce mass exodus because people won't die of hunger, and they go to where they think the water and food awaits, which is move north. And then there is another political problem. It's very difficult. How do you defend from foreigners, from immigration? Is the immediate effect. That's not the solution to the problem. Legislation, walls, guns, jails, concentration camps, returning population believes once again in pure races or superior races ideologies of West, like in 1933, but now all over the world. Political tension that is not just seen in these mass exodus or the strong capitalism in developed countries, but we look at it and we can see it in the war in Russia and Ukraine, with cultural and historic background that they may have their own historical complexity, but is still increased because of the climate crisis, because Western Europe was unable to free itself and become independent from gas, and gas is a fossil fuel. Even if the European Union resolution says that it's clean fuel, that doesn't stop it from being a greenhouse emitter. First of all, Germany and Western Europe were unable to. The time was not enough to free themselves from gas, and we're back in war, like at the beginning of the century, the war because of oil. This will increase. This tension will increase if humanity is not able to find answers and tools that will allow us to move to a decarbonized economy. It is a challenge for all of humanity, not just a political challenge. It is time for politics with a P to be stay away from these powerful interests. It is a time for innovation, and which is provoked by crises of a species. We need to reinvent ourselves. We have to see. But we have not yet been able to build enough tools to overcome this crisis. Some say that this is an discourse of the apocalypse. Some Cambridge theoreticians have not been yet scientifically proven, but some say that this coronavirus, for example, it has its roots in climate crisis, that the bats changed their flights to try and find food because of climate change, brought some species and viruses in contact with humanity, and this brought our virus. Those who had us provoked us to live completely differently from before. A virus made us do that, changed the way we lived. Then what would 10 or 20 or 100 viruses that are more powerful can do? And they could come because of this climate crisis. COVID-19 is almost like a lab test of what is coming if we're not able to change our world economic system in the short term. This is a task for politicians as never before. We have a role to play. It's not just a task for the economy. It is a task for political subject. It's something that people have to do, thinking collectively. They have to debate. People who care about humanity, who can act efficiently so that we can cause these big ideological, political, and social changes that are needed so that humanity can live. Shall I stop? I think that's basically my evaluation on the last few years, where we've been fighting, but still we've been very inefficient to stop climate change. Thank you.
And now, a special closing message from the United Nations Secretary General.
I thank Michael Bloomberg, Special Envoy for Climate Solutions and Ambition, for convening this important meeting. I was recently in Pakistan, where I was horrified at the devastation and suffering caused by the unprecedented floods. Today, it is Pakistan, but climate catastrophe is knocking on everyone's door. That is why we must treat adaptation and resilience building with the utmost urgency. As promised, adaptation finance must be doubled to $40 billion a year as a start. But ultimately, the only way to protect our societies is to limit global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees. And that means a 45% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions this decade and net zero emissions by 2050. But today, the world is on track for a 14% increase in emissions by 2030. This is totally unacceptable. We must keep 1.5 alive. And immediate emission cuts. We need all hands on deck. Plans need to be clear and verifiable. Transparency and accountability are key. And I particularly call for financial institutions to end investment in coal. Subsidies for fossil fuels must end. No loopholes and no exceptions. And I have mobilized a diverse group of experts from developing and developed countries to prepare concrete and precise parameters for truly credible net zero pledges by non-state actors. We have only one option, a decarbonized and climate-resilient future. I count on you all to make this a reality, and I thank you.
Thank you for coming to the United Nations Climate Action, Race to Zero, and Resilience Forum, supported by Bloomberg Philanthropies. Please proceed to the breakout sessions.